it's our first instinct to want to just put every color in the rainbow onto our design and make it as saturated and vibrant as possible. But the result sometimes ends up looking like this, where we go overboard with the color, we forget about some design rules, and we end up with something that maybe while you're working on it, you think, oh, this looks really cool and great. But when you show it to someone, that person is going to say, I can't read this. It's hard to read. It's giving me a headache. It is making me dizzy. Okay, so why is too much saturation sometimes a bad thing? Well, when your colors are too close in value, that's one issue, where you have your background nearly the same value as your foreground or your text. That's going to make things hard to read. Also, if you have multiple values in the background and you have one value in the foreground, that's going to create that optical illusion that we talked about with the two gray squares, where your eye is going to push the contrast, and the result is going to be a vibration effect happening in your eye where you start to feel kind of dizzy. So this is why sometimes we want to just take things down, don't go overboard with your saturated colors, and instead see about using some design rules so that you can maybe have some saturated effects like some of these images that we see here. But the reason that the saturated designs that are working look good is because the rules of design have been followed, where you're either using a color rule like a complementary color scheme, or you're making sure that the foreground object is significantly darker in value than the background, or vice versa. Okay, so let's do a little value experiment. I'm going to throw a black and white adjustment layer over this bad design here and just show you what this is looking like. Now, actually, in black and white, it's a little bit easier to read, but we can see the problems. The value of the text is kind of like a light 20% gray value, and the value of the background is quite varying, but it's never giving you enough contrast. We like to have at least 40% difference in value between your text and your background. So let's do something a little bit different. Instead of having a fully saturated background like this, let's use a gradient that is going to have a more minimal sort of gradient. We can certainly use a gradient, but this time we're going to use something that's going to have maybe a single color, and maybe it'll be kind of darker at the bottom and then lighter as it gets upward into the top of our design there. And now we can place dark objects down here where it's very light, and we can place light objects up here where it's kind of darker. So now what I'm going to do is throw a little text on here just to see how this could work. Now this text is not contrasty enough if I were to put it up here, but if I put it down in the white space, that works. Right? That's easy to read. Watch what happens if I take the same and I put it up here. It's kind of okay to read up there. It's not ideal, but watch what happens somewhere in the middle here. About there, it starts to give you that vibration feeling in your eye, where your eye is vibrating and it's having trouble seeing the design there. Now, we don't have to stick to gray. We can use any color we want as long as the value stays the same. So I'm going to throw let's do a solid color over this. And what I'm going to do is actually clip this solid color to my text by holding down the option button and clicking on the line between color fill and the word spectrum. Now, this is just a little demonstration. If you are not quite savvy in Photoshop yet, you don't have to follow along. I just want to show you how the value is more important than the color. And now I'm going to change the blending mode to color on this color layer here. And now watch, I'm going to just change the color. The value is actually going to stay the same. So there it's orange, there it's green. Green and blue as a color scheme usually just doesn't look very good. We can keep it blue on blue, because that will then be a monochromatic type of color scheme. Orange on blue, that would be a complementary color scheme. And so I'm seeing kind of some different colors here, and I tend to like to go with the monochromatic color scheme because it's more minimal, it's more elegant, it gives us a more elegant look, right? But if you wanted to do something highly saturated, maybe you could just throw a big sphere, maybe orange sphere into this design. And I'll use just a big ellipse. That way we get kind of some contrast there. I might want to make it a color that's a little bit either lighter or really darker. And then if we were to include that, we just need to make our text fit inside that sphere, because if the background changes color behind your text, that's going to also lead to your text being very hard to read. So one final trick, I know I've showed you this before, but you can move your hue saturation slider around after you add a hue saturation adjustment layer and see the different color options that come up.